Hello, Internet. Vinny D here, and I'm broadcasting to you once again from the Fortress of Fragitude. Today we're going to do some drawing. We're going to be drawing Penny Rabentloff from AntiBunny. So let's get started. Right off the bat, we're going to get a gesture drawing going. That's going to give us the bones of the character. I like to use blue here, just to keep everything separate. Don't mix it up. We've got our basic head shape. And Penny is a child, so the circle representing her torso should be no bigger than her head. Her abdomen should be very short. In fact, the circle representing the hips should almost or completely touch the circle representing the torso. And now we're going to lay out the pose. Just put some bones to those limbs, and then I'm going to flesh them out. She's going to do sort of a rocking on her heels kind of pose. Penny is the youngest of the four Rabentloff sisters. Her older sisters are, in order, Penelope, Piago, and Petunia. Penny is roughly 8 years old as of her first appearance in the comic. And she is a clever little cookie. But not so good at making friends. Her friends are a dog, a robot, and a trainee wizard. Actually, those are pretty awesome friends to have. So, keep doing what you're doing, Penny. So, now that we've got a gesture laid down, we're going to go up and do a sketch layer. Sometimes I skip this layer if I'm working on something fast, but today I want to do something of a little higher quality, and the sketch layer, being separate from the gesture layer, offers me a little bit of a luxury of being able to rough details out before I have to be completely exact with the ink layer. So I use this as a dark gray to separate it from the line art that's going to come later. This gives me a chance to spot and fix my mistakes as well. You'll notice I turned down the opacity on the layer below because I want to be able to keep focused on the layer I'm drawing. Penny is a kid, once again, so she should have fairly skinny legs. She hasn't developed those powerful bunny jumping muscles yet. The rules of anatomy for kids are a little bit different from adults. Combine that with being a non-human species, the rules of anatomy for which I kind of had to make up, it gets a little interesting. And now just going to add a little more detail here and there. Fill out those eyelashes. Penny has some rather thick eyelashes. All the better for giving the hurt baby seal eyes look. If I were just doing a sketch, I could stop right here, really. It's not half bad. Sometimes it just flows. Feet. Never can get those ankles quite right. Close enough. Moving right along. Time to move up and do the line art layer. Switching over to black. I said switching to black. There we go. And reducing the opacity on the sketch layer and getting rid of the gesture layer altogether. The nose is a good place to start. It provides a nice central axis for the entire face, and you can draw an imaginary line from the bridge of the nose up to the eyebrow, and if you do that, you should be able to perfectly center the eyes and get them all correctly aligned. Just gonna thicken up those eyelashes. Once again, eyelashes shouldn't come straight off the eyes, but sort of sweep out at an angle. Never too late to put a little bit more detail in. Make that hair a little softer looking and more fluffy. Same with the cheeks. Not those cheeks, you perverts. And Penny's mouth, she usually doesn't smile that much. Her usual facial expression is this. Mouth just half agape, curiously, as if she's just about to ask a question. And put those cute little buttons on her overalls. Now, just a simple matter of making some more confident, continuous, smooth lines over the sketch, and doing the sketch layer. Again, gave us that luxury of doing it rough first, so that it's easier to come over and do the line art on. I don't have very steady hands, so this helps me a lot. Some people can skip that altogether. Big fluffy hair. Don't forget the other ear. And Penny's little hair charm. Fun thing about that, it was inspired by the hair tie Lane has in the anime Serial Experiments Lane. A really thought-provoking piece of late cyberpunk that I would highly recommend. That still holds up today. Of course, Penny, having the name Penny, has an actual penny tied in there. So it's sort of her own personal character item. I think I sketched the arm a little too thin, so I'll just do it a little thicker here. The hands, when viewed from the side, are a little easier to draw as long as you remember that all fingers aren't always visible. That's the tricky thing about hands. Between what is visible and what your brain thinks you should have to draw because you know it's there. You know there are 4 fingers on a human hand, or 3 on one of my bunny characters. So if you're trying to draw hands from memory, you may want to try and draw all the fingers every time. But even look straight on at your hand. You can't always see every finger from every angle. A lot of learning to draw is learning what not to draw. Okay, that's the basics of the line art. Now I'm just gonna do a little extra detail here. I'm gonna thicken a few of these lines. Add a little bit of shadow. That's my own style. I like to merge lines and shadows together. It's just something I do. It was really popular with the hard-boiled styles of crime comics. I guess I could cite Frank Miller as a bit of an influence on that. Say what you will about the man, but he has produced a lot of great stuff. And you want to vary the line thickness a bit. Not all the lines should be the same thickness. Outlines thicker than inside detail lines, and even those lines should vary in themselves. When you have a thick line next to a thinner line, it creates a feeling of depth. And that really helps make things pop and come to life. In fact, even by varying pressure, you can vary the thickness within a line itself. Which, if you look closer at this picture, you'll be able to notice. I'll put a link to the final piece in the description. Okay. That should be enough for detail. Maybe a little more. Checking for any errors. Looking good. I think it's about time to move on to coloring. So now we're going to select out the space around, invert, so now that we have a nice selection in the shape of her silhouette. Go down a layer, which we've cleared out, and put a nice base coat of her primary color on one of these layers underneath. Now we can paint underneath the line art and work out some of the larger areas of color, with her primary color and her secondary color being a copper orangish brown and a more tannish color for her muzzle, underbelly, and hair. I'm using the paintbrush tool here, just going to rough that out, and I can clean up the edges later. And now you want to duplicate the line art layer. This is part of my method. By duplicating the line art layer, I can speed up some of the areas by using flood fills within the line art without actually coloring on the line art layer itself. There's the line art layer that I'm coloring, and the duplicate, which remains untouched. This comes in handy sometimes. And kind of allows me to step back if I've made a mistake. If you wanted to go about this the more slow and painful way, you could color entirely underneath the line art layer without duplicating by using the line art layer to make magic wand selections and filling in regions on the layer below. But this way is faster. I can flood fill in the areas that are convenient to flood fill, and paintbrush the areas that need more fine detail or don't have a clear line separating them. And I can drop down below and paint underneath that if I need to as well, filling in any small gaps that are hard to get to by a flood fill. Penny's other color is a sort of creamy white color. Her original design called for her only to be the copper and white color, but I later decided to make part of her color a lighter tan as well, but keep the white forearms, paws, and toes. I just think it gives her a little bit more character. And now we've got some pretty decent flats here. Now it's time to shade. I'm using a transparent layer and paintbrushing with black on top of it, adjusting the opacity. Sometimes I like to play with the opacity until I'm happy with the color, or use a higher opacity so I can clearly see what I'm doing as I'm shading, and then I'll mess around with it some more to get the exact level of shade I want. In this case, I'm going to use some fairly hard shadows and only one layer of shading, because I just think it suits this coloring and art style better than a full gradient shadow. Sometimes you can do too much to a picture. So we're just going to fill in these spaces. Just lots of brushing with black. Following the contours. the light is coming from the upper right. So considering where it's coming from, think of everything as a 3D object and where it's going to cast a shadow. What parts of it are facing towards the light, what parts are away from the light, and what things are behind it. Just the same, gonna come back with some white. It's gonna go straight on the same layer, and put a little bit of highlight in with these white streaks, using again the paintbrush tool. Now they may look a little too hard right now, but we're gonna fix that in just a minute. You'll see what I'm doing soon. Don't want to go too overboard on the highlights. Just spots where the light's going to be hitting her directly. Now I'm coming back with the smudge brush, and I'm softening up the edges of these highlights and shadows. Before I used to use the Gaussian blur filter, but while that is faster, I find this method gives me a lot more control. I can choose just how much any particular spot I want to be softened or how hard I want the light or shadow to be. So usually I smudge the highlights more, making them soft, but I only smudge the very edges of the shadows just to smooth them out but not make them too soft. So I retain that nice hard shadow look with a nicer soft highlighting. And now we're just going to clean up the places where we went outside the lines by once again selecting the open areas, going back up to the other layer, and just deleting everything outside the lines. Very easy to do. And now for some background. Just a quick, simple, and easy background. Some grassy ground, some blue sky. Let's give it a little personality. Some nice, fluffy clouds. Fluffy, fluffy. Pretty clouds. I suck at clouds, but I'm trying to get better. Like everything else, it helps to think of them as 3D objects. Got some, I think they're called cumulonimbus, and some nice wispy cirrus clouds in between. Some very light grays to give the clouds some depth. One more cloud. And of course, if Penny has a light source on her and has shadows on her, she too will be casting a shadow on the ground. Can't forget that. And a little highlight right there at the edge of the terrain. Soften that up too. And it gives it a nice rough and grassy look. Gonna soften up that shadow, add a second layer of shade right under her feet. Little bit of line there right on the ground. Make it more apparent that her feet are touching the ground, where they are and aren't touching the ground. And lastly, one thing I often forget to do, signing it. So there you go. That's Penny Rebentlov. Enjoy. This is Vinny D. Out.